Hi, welcome to Member Exchange. I'm Sam, and along with my teammates, Moise, Lauren, Cassie, and Mavini, we are representing Queen's Law and Pro Bono Students Canada. On behalf of all of us, we would like to thank the Kingston Chamber of Commerce and as well for organizing this project, and as well our supervising lawyer, Alex McPherson. Today, we will be discussing cybersecurity and privacy and how, as a business, you can best protect yourselves and stay informed. First, I will just read a disclaimer. This presentation does not contain legal advice. Pro Bono Students Canada is a student organization. This presentation was prepared with the assistance of PBSC Queen's Law students. But PBSC students are not lawyers, and they are not authorized to provide legal advice. The presentation contains general discussion. Okay, with that said, I'm just going to introduce a bit of what we'll be going over today. First, my colleagues Mavini and Cassie will be going over some key terms and legal statutes that apply to privacy and cybersecurity. Then Moise and Lauren will go over a fact scenario to help you apply these strategies in practice. And then at the end, I will end the presentation on best practices and resources available. Today, our goal is to have you leaving with knowing the following information. First, what is personal information? When do we collect it? And why do we have a legal responsibility to protect it? Second, what is the source law governing privacy and cybersecurity laws? And what obligations and duties does that impose on small businesses? And third, what can small businesses do to protect themselves / what are the best practices? And with that, I will pass it off to Mavini to introduce some terms.
Before we talk about legal obligations, it's helpful to define a few key terms that come up in privacy and cybersecurity. I'll be talking about a few of the terms, but we encourage you to pause the video to read about some of the others. Next slide, please. First, personal information refers to any information about an identifiable individual. This can include obvious things like a person's name, age, or ID numbers, but it also includes things like employee files or financial records. If information can be linked to a specific person, it is generally considered personal information. Next, a data breach occurs when personal information is lost, accessed, or disclosed without authorization. This can happen in many ways, such as a stolen laptop, hacked systems, or accidentally sending sensitive information to the wrong person. Next slide. Another important concept is consent. In many situations, businesses must obtain consent before collecting or using someone's personal information. There are two common types of consent: express consent and implied consent. Express consent means the individual clearly agrees, for example, by signing a form or clicking I agree on a website. Implied consent can be inferred from a person's actions or the context. For example, if a customer provides their email address to receive a receipt, it may be reasonable to use that email to then send the receipt. Next slide. Many breaches today occur through cyber threats. These include things like malware, which is malicious software designed to damage systems or steal information, and phishing, where actors pretend to be a trusted source in order to trick someone into revealing sensitive information like passwords or banking details. Next slide. Finally, there are three key terms that describe how businesses handle personal information: collection, use, and disclosure. Collection refers to gathering or obtaining personal information from any source. Use refers to how that information is accessed, reviewed, or applied within your organization. A disclosure means sharing that information with someone outside your organization. These concepts are important because privacy laws regulate how businesses collect, use, and disclose personal information. I'll now pass it over to my colleague to discuss some of these more terms.
Thanks, Mavini. I'm going to finish with the rest of the definitions and expanding on the description of some of the more important key terms. First, we start with an access request, which in the privacy context is a request for personal information that an organization holds. This can come from someone who is requesting access to their own information or someone requesting someone else's personal information. Next, we have due diligence. This is an action that is considered reasonable for people to be expected to take in order to keep themselves or their property safe. An example of due diligence could be making sure that there are strong passwords for all of your social media and business sites. Significant harm is a somewhat broad term. It can mean many things, including bodily harm, humiliation, damage to reputation or relationships, loss of employment, business or professional opportunities, financial loss, identity theft, negative effects on a credit record, and damage to or loss of property. Keep this term in mind as we move through the presentation, as we will discuss how cyber threats that pose a risk to the personal information of your clients can cause significant harm. Next slide, please. Next is a safeguard. This is a physical, organizational, or technical measure of protection that must protect against loss or theft, as well as unauthorized access, disclosure, copying, use, or modification of information. This is also a key term, as this presentation will highlight many safeguards and best practices a business owner can take at the end. A commercial electronic message is a message sent by any means of telecommunication. This can include a text, sound, or voice and image message. Next, to unsubscribe means to get an organization or business to remove your name from their mailing list so that you no longer receive emails or posts from them, but it can also mean just to remove someone else's name from this kind of list. Finally, a password encryption is the process of converting data into a coded format so that it can only be read or accessed by someone with the correct decryption key. I will now pass it back to my colleague to discuss the legal framework that cyber threats for business are operating in.
Thank you, Cassie. The relevant legal framework is PIPEDA. PIPEDA stands for the Personal Information Protection Electronic Document Act. PIPEDA is the federal privacy law that governs how private sector organizations in Canada collect, use, and disclose personal information in the course of commercial activities. For many small businesses, this law will apply if you collect personal information from customers, employees, or clients as a part of running your business. The purpose of PIPEDA is to balance two things: protecting individuals' privacy rights while allowing organizations to continue to use personal information for reasonable business purposes. Next slide, please. PIPEDA is built around 10 privacy principles that guide how organizations should handle personal information. A few principles are especially important for small businesses. Again, during the course of this section, we encourage you to pause the video to learn more about some of the other principles featured. First, organizations should be clear about why they are collecting personal information and should only collect what is necessary. Second, businesses need meaningful consent before collecting, using, or sharing personal information. Next slide. Third, organizations must protect personal information with appropriate safeguards. This can include things like secure storage, strong passwords, limited access to sensitive information, and staff training. Next slide. Finally, individuals have the right to access their personal information and raise concerns if they believe it has been handled improperly. The main takeaway is that if your business handles personal information, it's important to be aware of PIPEDA and ensure you have reasonable practices in place to protect that information. My colleague will now go into more detail on how businesses can apply these principles in practice.
Thank you, Mavini. This section will now highlight the parts of PIPEDA that are of the most importance to business owners and the obligations they have surrounding their clients' personal information. Beginning with the collection, use, and disclosure of information, PIPEDA uses the reasonable person test to evaluate how a business can use personal information. It states that an organization may collect, use, or disclose personal information only for the purposes that a reasonable person would consider appropriate in the circumstances. Let's start with the first part, that a reasonable person would consider appropriate. The reasonable person standard is a hypothetical individual that acts with normal prudence, caution, and common sense. But it is not just what the reasonable person would consider to be appropriate, but also in the circumstances. The circumstances will depend on the particular facts of the collection, use, and disclosure of personal information that a business is using. For example, a business may want to collect personal information, such as the addresses of their customers, for billing purposes. In applying this test to past cases, courts have looked at whether the collection, use, or disclosure of personal information is directed to a genuine business interest and whether the loss of privacy is beneficial to any benefit gained. In using the example I just gave, collecting addresses appears to be a genuine business interest, as it involves invoicing customers for services rendered or products provided. And the loss of privacy is generally beneficial to the benefit gained because this information for billing may be required for the business to secure their cash flow. Some common examples of inappropriate uses would be the use of information that is otherwise unlawful, profiling or categorization that could lead to unfair or discriminatory treatment, and requiring passwords to social media accounts for the purpose of employee screening. Next slide, please. Next is the duty to report. An organization must report to the Privacy Commissioner of Canada any breach of security safeguards involving personal information if it is reasonable in the circumstances to believe that the breach causes a real risk of significant harm to an individual. As we covered earlier, significant harm is a broad term, so the question to ask here is whether a reasonable person in these circumstances would believe that it causes a risk of any kind of significant harm, whether that be bodily harm, damage to reputation, identity theft, and so on. Businesses must notify an individual of any breach of their security safeguards that involve their personal information that they have control of. Notice here that you don't need a reasonable belief that the breach causes risk to the individual affected. You are still required to notify them. Next slide, please. Now we move on to customer access. A customer has the right to access their personal data, and organizations must inform them if they hold information about them upon their request. Businesses must also allow the individual access to this information. In the case of third-party disclosure, where it may not always be possible to provide a list of all the organizations that information has been disclosed to, a business can provide the customer with a list of organizations to which it may have disclosed their information. An example of where this situation could arise is when there is communication with a shipping partner and the client's personal information was disclosed to the shipping partner in order to facilitate their order. Next slide, please. And finally, a business has to respond to a request from a customer within a reasonable time and at no cost to the customer. This information must be provided or made available in a form that is generally understandable. For example, it should not be full of internal abbreviations that only your organization would know and understand. The customer should be able to read their information and not have to guess what it means. A customer has a right to request corrections to their data when they can successfully demonstrate the inaccuracy or incompleteness of it, and the business must amend the information as required. This can depend on the nature of the information that is held, but this usually means correcting, deleting, or adding information. I will now pass it on to my colleagues to discuss how to navigate cybersecurity in practice.
Thank you, Mavini and Cassie. So now we're going to move on to our next section. Next slide. This section is called Scenario. So here we present a hypothetical situation. We want you to pause the video and think about things that possibly went wrong. Afterwards, we will say what we thought was wrong and give remedies to the issue. Note, what we find as an issue, harm, or remedy is not an exhaustive list. Next slide. Here is the scenario, and I'll quickly read it out. Andrew owns a successful coffee shop in downtown Kingston. He's always busy and is always working. One day, Andrew decides to go to a local restaurant for brunch while he's on his break. He opens his laptop and connects to the restaurant's Wi-Fi. It opens up a customer data spreadsheet. He wanted to add a couple more customers to the list while waiting for his food. After completing the updates, Andrew decides to host a Teams meeting over Zoom with the staff to discuss new marketing tactics to boost sales. Next slide. So please pause the video and find out what went wrong. Next slide. So the first issue that we found was called Andrew hosting a Zoom call at the cafe. You might ask, why is this an issue? Well, there are two potential harms that we found. Harm one is called shoulder surfing. For example, say if Andrew was sitting in an area where another customer could see his screen while one of his employees was sharing private and confidential information such as customer data. The other customer might then use that information for illicit means. You might ask, what are potential solutions to this harm? Well, we found three. A, look for an area where your back is against a wall. What this does is that it prevents people from watching your screen from behind you, thereby protecting any visuals you show on your screen. B, using a screen protector to obscure your screen's visibility from afar, so even if others can see your screen, they will get an obscured view. 3, the third option is simple. Take your call in your business's office or at your home. And the second harm that we found is called Zoom bombing. This is where an unauthorized person gains access to the Zoom link and shares inappropriate content, makes loud noises, or puts unwanted messages in the chat. This could be an issue here for Andrew if he has a public Zoom link that say he posts on a forum like Facebook. This can be an opportunity for unauthorized users to enter the call. You might ask, what are remedies to this issue? Well, we found 4. Firstly, not sharing links publicly, having a waiting room to filter who joins the call, having passwords for meetings, which are only shared with authorized users, and finally, restricting which individuals can present or share screens. That is all for issue number 1. I will now pass it off to Lauren.
Awesome. So now the second issue that we came up with was that an employee, or Andrew in this scenario, downloads a customer email spreadsheet on his personal laptop. So some possible harms that are attributed to this is that if a customer email spreadsheet is downloaded on the personal laptop, there is a greater risk of unauthorized access. Personal devices often lack the same security protections as workplace systems, such as encryption or monitoring. And if the laptop is stolen, lost, or accessed by someone else, such as in a cafe, the customer data could easily be exposed. The second is customer privacy and phishing threats. So if the email list were compromised, attackers could use it to send phishing or spam emails that appear to come from the company. Because these emails would target real customers, they may be seen as more credible, increasing the risk that recipients could be tricked into sharing personal information or clicking on malicious links. And the third is legal and reputational consequences that can stem from this, which would be exposure of customer email addresses, could be considered a data breach under PIPEDA, which Cassie and Mavini talked about earlier, and this could lead to regulatory scrutiny and damages the organizational's reputation, as customers may lose trust in how their personal information is handled. So a few ways to mitigate these risks would first and foremost use secure storage and encryption to ensure that any customer data stored on a personal device, if it has to be stored on a personal device, is encrypted and protected with strong passwords or multi-factor authentication. And again, like I just said, ideally sensitive files should remain on secure company systems or approved cloud platforms. The second would be limiting and monitoring access. So implement policies that restrict downloading customer data to personal devices, your own and your other employees. And if they do, use access controls, logging and monitoring the information so that the organization can track who accesses and downloads this information. You can also provide cybersecurity training to employees, so to train them on proper data handling and cybersecurity risks. And then lastly, just following these privacy compliance procedures to ensure that they all comply with PIPEDA. And next slide, please. And then, like Moe said at the beginning of the scenario, this list isn't exhaustive with the issues that could arise. So here are just a few additional concerns if you want to pause and read them. And then Sam will also be expanding on some of them later in the PowerPoint. Next slide.
Thanks, Lauren. So far we've seen some terms and the law that guides cybersecurity and privacy. We've looked at real-life scenarios, and now I will provide a deeper dive into the risks that businesses face and the strategies to mitigate for them. So some potential threats that a small business might face, as we mentioned before, phishing emails and smishing, weak passwords and reusing credentials, open and unsecured Wi-Fi. So that would be like having your main business Wi-Fi being the guest Wi-Fi. You want to have a secure VPN Wi-Fi that's separate from that. Unprotected devices that are easy to be hacked, and as well employee negligence and insider threats. When it comes to thinking about a plan for cybersecurity, it's best to consider some of the following. Lack of data retrieval processes or backup solutions. Again, if you are in a situation where you do suffer a data breach, you want to be able to have the resources to resume your business as quickly as possible. And that's why you should regularly have backups so that you have means of restoring that information should you be under threat. Another thing to consider is reputational loss, which Lauren had mentioned prior. Again, when it comes to a data breach, you might risk certain business loss from the fact that customers have lost certain faith or trust in your ability to handle their personal information. Another thing that's probably top of mind for any business is cost. So I'll be able to go into that a lot deeper in the next couple slides too. How much would it cost and how much you should put aside for cybersecurity strategies. And then as well as some technical safeguards and human error that is also important that can be rectified through either acquiring cybersecurity products or through regular training with your employees. So the first one that I want to look at is phishing and smishing. I know we had talked about it earlier, but just to give you a bigger picture, phishing or smishing is a fraudulent email or SMS designed to trick you into giving away sensitive information, such as passwords, bank cards, personal information, login credentials, and so forth. I have some images of what they would look like on the next slide, but the thing to look out for are spelling or grammar mistakes, suspicious sender email or phone number, direct requests for information, unexpected attachments or URLs that don't match the company, and most importantly, urgent or too good to be true language. So here are three images. We have two that are SMS, smishing, and one email that are phishing. What we should look for here when we're talking about spelling or grammar mistakes, if you look at the second bottom SMS, you can see there's a hyphen between your account, which would be a grammar mistake. If you look at the email from PayPal, what you'll notice is it's not coming from paypal.com, but it's coming from paypal-accounts.com. Know that any business, especially any business as large as PayPal, will be sending emails directly from their domain, and anything that is out of the ordinary or different than their company's trademark should raise alarms immediately. Another thing to consider is the direct request for information. So as you can see, they're asking you in the email to confirm your information, as well as in the Canada Post, they're asking you it's a final warning and that you need to click this link right now so that you can rectify the issue. Other things to keep in mind too are unexpected attachments. These would be links, especially links which are different than the company's. So if you can see the Canada Post smishing attempt, they're linking you to Facebook. So that should also put you on alert that this is not Canada Post that's messaging you at this moment. And lastly, urgent but too good to be true information. When you have situations like you need to respond within 24 hours, as in the PayPal email, and as well as the CRA benefits smishing attempt, trying to make it seem as if you have money or a benefit that's waiting for you, causes some users to overlook the attempts at hacking that these perpetrators are trying to do. Another thing to consider when it comes to how do you solve for this, the best solution is actually just regularly scheduled and refresher employee training. It's easy for these phishing and smishing attempts to go unnoticed, and they evolve over time. So it's important to keep your employees informed so that they know when to spot it and how to report it. Beyond that, I've also provided 2 free resources from the government in Canada on phishing and smishing, which are free for you to review and provide similar tips and tricks for how you can mitigate for it. Something else to consider would be weak passwords, which we've already mentioned in the past. But if you look on the left side of the words in the red, what you'll notice is that all of these are really easy to guess passwords. And when it comes to hackers, they will use automated bots to guess as many passwords as possible. For that reason, what we recommend is that you use strong, long passwords. So that would be, for as an example, having a mix of upper and lower cases, having numbers and letters mixed in, and as well as even including special characters. And rather than having the employees update those passwords, we recommend that you enforce a criteria so that you can be sure that there are no weak passwords that open your business into vulnerabilities. A second thing that you should highly consider is setting up multi-factor authentication, which I will go over in the next slide. So multi-factor authentication is the idea that the more personalized your security measures are, the harder it will be for someone else to bypass it. So what it is a security method that requires 2 or more types of verification to log into an account. That would be anything from the following 3. Something you know. So that would mostly be a password, but it could also be a security question or a PIN, something you have, usually your phone, or a token fob that provides a one-time use password, and something you are. So that would be your fingerprint ID, touch ID, voice ID. And the point here is that it adds an extra step to the login process and an extra layer of security to your accounts and your devices. That way, if a cyber criminal ever gets your password, there is another defense in place to stop them. So for instance, if you do have a compromised password, they would not be able to log into your computer without also having your physical phone, because that's where you would receive your secondary authentication. Where it is possible, you should always have multi-factor authentication enabled for all devices. And so I've listed 2 free applications, Google Authenticator and Microsoft Authenticator, which you can use starting today, and you can find them on your mobile or desktop app store. Moving on, something that is also important to consider when it comes to planning for cybersecurity is reputational loss. Sound cybersecurity strategies convey to the public that you do take privacy very seriously. And the pros here is that it'll set your business apart from others as providing superior service, as customers will be able to trust that when they provide you with information, you know how to handle it. At the end of the day, it's essential, if you are handling any form of sensitive information, to keep in mind cybersecurity strategies. As you know, if you have payment or you have customer information, that's not something that you want to take lightly. A general tip here too is if you do have a website for your business, we recommend that you create a separate page for privacy so that you can address some of the strategies that we've laid out earlier in the presentation, to also convey to the audience, to convey to your customers that you do take privacy very seriously. On top of that, you can also make a basic breach response plan so that you know that if a threat should occur, you know exactly organizationally how you can recover. Next, and something that I'm sure is very top of mind, is the potential cost. So for a small business, investing in cybersecurity infrastructure, that would run you about $5,000 to $10,000 annually. And the best way to look at this is as an investment in your business. We've already gone over some issues of loss of data as well as reputational loss. But the reality is that the financial cost to recover from a data breach could be significantly higher than the amount of money that you put forth into it. And best to understand too that a small business doesn't need everything. You can start small and you can start smart. And what you should focus mostly on is just being legally compliant with PIPEDA and other compliance legislation, and as well as professionally secure. And starting by investing some of your budget towards having strong cybersecurity strategies in place is a way to go about that. Lastly, and what's really great about cybersecurity and privacy is that there are many free tools, softwares, and resources built into everyday technology and devices, which can actually save you on costs. So we've gone over key terms, we've gone over a real life scenario, and we've also talked a bit about some of the threats and some of the ways that you can mitigate for those. I'm just going to end here with some key takeaways and what you can do starting today. So first and foremost, it's best to just implement some safeguards. Having a VPN for your Wi-Fi, having multi-factor authentication, having firewalls, device encryption, automatic updates, and enforcing strong long passwords. All of these will go a long way in making sure that you are secure from cybersecurity threats. Beyond that, you should change the passwords on your default Wi-Fi accounts, as well as use guest Wi-Fi for customers. And as well on the Wi-Fi accounts, to change those default ones to modems. All of these are easily guessable. And the last thing that you would want in your business is to have those internet resources be hacked. A second thing to consider is the principle of least privilege. So this is a security concept whereby users, systems, and processes are granted only the minimum access rights or privileges necessary to perform those authorized tasks. So for instance, if you are the business's accountant, it would make sense to give you access to financial records, but it may not be the same to provide that financial record access to your secretary. This is the strategy of principle of least privilege, as it limits potential damage from a breach and limits unauthorized access to only those who it's necessary to do their line of business. Another thing to keep in mind too is backing up regularly. Again, you always want to be prepared for any threat. Even if you do have strategies implemented, you want to be able to resume your business as quickly as possible so you can continue supporting your customers. And lastly, what is also important to implement internally is employee training. So I've linked some free resources and training that's available for government in Canada. We really recommend that you check them out, and the link is there below. With that, we'd encourage you to pause, to take a moment, reflect on the things that we've discussed today. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them in the comments of the video. And as well, if you are interested in any of the slides that were, or the topics that we've talked about, we will be providing the slides as well linked so that you can review those as well. I'm just going to end with one more disclaimer, just to remind you guys, this presentation does not contain legal advice. Pro Bono Students Canada is a student organization. This presentation was prepared with the assistance of PBSC Queen's Law student volunteers. PBSC students are not lawyers, and they are not authorized to provide legal advice. The presentation contains general discussion. We hope that you found this information really valuable. I'd like to thank my teammates again, Moise, Lauren, Cassie, and Mavini, and as well as the members at Kingston Chamber of Commerce and our supervising lawyer Alexander McPherson. Thank you so much for watching and have a great day.